Imagine you've just been, well, mercilessly beaten.
Right, just completely brutalized.
Exactly. You're chained to a wall in a pitch-black inner dungeon. Your feet are locked in these heavy stocks. You're bleeding all over the place. And you know for an absolute fact that your colleagues, the people in your same line of work, have recently been executed by the local authorities.
Which is terrifying.
Beyond terrifying. Logic dictates you should be absolutely paralyzed with fear. I mean, you should be quiet, trying not to draw any more attention to yourself, right?
Just surviving the night.
Yeah, but instead, at midnight, you decide to start singing at the absolute top of your lungs.
It's completely wild.
It is. And today, we are looking at a framework that claims this isn't just some, bizarre psychological coping mechanism. It claims this is actually an active, highly effective weapon.
It really is a radical proposition. I mean, it takes what we typically understand as a natural human reaction to suffering and just totally flips it. It turns it into a tool for dismantling that suffering entirely.
And that is exactly what we are dissecting today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
So we are exploring a massive religious gathering that took place just yesterday, actually, July 2nd, 2026, over in Guboko, Benue State, Nigeria.
A truly massive event.
Unbelievably huge.
Yeah.
Our sources for today are a detailed sermon outline and the live video transcript of a message titled, "The Gracious Life of Praise That Keeps All Yoke Broken."
Catchy title.
Yeah, and it was delivered to a crowd of tens of thousands by Pastor Dr. W.F. Kumuyi at an event known as the Global Crusade with Kumuyi, or GCK.
Right, and the sheer scale of the GCK is staggering.
Right.
But what we are really analyzing today is how the core message of this sermon zeroes in on the deeply personal architecture of human belief. And, well, human suffering, really.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the theological framework presented in this specific sermon. We're going to explore how this framework defines true freedom, the really highly specific role it assigns to extreme praise during dark times, and the mechanics of what it calls spiritual authority.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. Now, before we jump into the material, I want to offer a quick orientation for you listening. This deep dive explores some very profound spiritual and supernatural claims. I mean, the text deals with literal demonic oppression, ancestral curses, and miraculous instantaneous healings.
Right. Very intense themes.
So our goal here is purely to unpack the ideas and beliefs presented in this source material. We aren't here to endorse them or validate them, but to give you a front row seat to understand the mechanics of this massive cultural and spiritual worldview.
Which is fascinating, regardless of your own personal beliefs.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how this sermon claims to break a yoke, and by the way, it defines a yoke as any burden, confinement, or, invisible weight a person carries, we first have to look at how it defines the mind's role in achieving freedom.
Right, and the sermon builds its entire foundation on a very recognizable verse. John 8:32, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Yeah, but what's fascinating here is how the sermon actually defines that word truth. I mean, it completely detaches it from the idea of objective, universally observable facts. Like, it's not a math equation or a historical date.
Right, it's not like saying 2 + 2 is 4.
Exactly. Instead, it treats truth as a highly personalized divine promise. And that promise acts as an impenetrable shield against anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
The pastor presents this very stark dichotomy. Basically, embracing this personalized truth breaks yokes, whereas believing falsehood, lying, or deception literally binds your soul in invisible chains.
And he uses some striking biblical case studies to prove this point, focusing on the early apostles. Like, he brings up Stephen, who was stoned to death in Acts 7, and James, who was actually beheaded by King Herod.
Right, fairly grim examples.
Super grim. And the pastor points out that you could look at those terrifying events happening to your peers and logically conclude that doing God's work is basically a death sentence.
Which, I mean, would be the most natural human reaction possible.
Yeah.
Psychology tells us that human beings are totally hardwired to project the failures or tragedies of others onto their own lives.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a fundamental survival instinct. Like, if you see your colleague walk into a cave and they don't come out, your brain automatically tells you, hey, that cave is lethal for you too. Don't go in there.
Right, self-preservation.
But the pastor argues that using other people's negative experiences as the blueprint for your own life is a form of believing an error. An error, in this specific framework, binds you.
Wow.
Yeah, he explains that James being beheaded was simply James fulfilling his specific destiny, which allowed him to spend more time in heaven. It had absolutely nothing to do with anyone else's faith.
That's a huge perspective shift, and he contrasts that with Peter, right? Because Peter gets arrested immediately after James is executed.
Right, same situation, basically.
Yeah, he is thrown into prison, chained between two soldiers. By all earthly logic, Peter should be having a massive panic attack, but the pastor specifically notes that Peter didn't suffer from high blood pressure in that cell.
Which is a very specific, relatable, modern detail to add.
Totally. He says Peter didn't have hypertension. He wasn't having a sleepless night tossing and turning. The text says he actually fell fast asleep right there between his heavily armed guards because he was anchored in God's specific promise to him that his work wasn't finished.
He's completely unaffected by the context.
Yeah, so it's almost like, well, it's like spiritual doom scrolling, right? If you look at someone else's worst case scenario, you just scroll through all the tragedies happening to people around you and you assume that's your inevitable destiny. You're believing an error that binds you.
Spiritual doom scrolling, I like that.
Thanks. But how does the pastor suggest believers actually override that primal survival instinct? How do they stay focused on their own truth?
Well, it requires a radical, almost aggressive narrowing of focus. The pastor instructs the listener to basically accept, believe, confess, confide in, decide for, and entirely embrace the truth of their own calling.
So no room for doubt at all.
None. For you, the listener, this sermon offers a very strict cognitive blueprint for overriding that natural human dread. You don't pretend that Stephen wasn't stoned. I mean, you acknowledge it happened.
Right, it's not denial.
Right, it's not denial. You just refuse to accept his stoning as the final word on your own life. You isolate the specific promise you believe God made to you, and you elevate that promise far above the physical reality happening right in front of you.
The internal conviction has to completely overwrite the external circumstances.
Exactly.
Man, that is a massive cognitive shift. It takes all that mental energy you would normally spend on worrying and just forces it into this hyper-focused internal belief.
It's intense mental discipline.
But if human beings manage to override that instinct, what happens when the physical world actually crashes down on them? Because at some point, you aren't just watching someone else suffer. Sometimes you are the one in the dungeon.
And that is exactly where the sermon pivots from internal mindset to external physical action. Because belief alone isn't presented as the final step here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, belief is just the prerequisite for the action that follows.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The pastor brings up the scenario I mentioned at the very start of the show, the story of Paul and Silas from Acts 16.
Right, the dungeon.
Yeah. So they had just cast a spirit out of a girl, which totally ruined the profit margins of the men exploiting her. As retaliation, they are beaten without a trial. The text literally says they were beaten with many stripes. They are bleeding, they are thrown into the innermost prison, and their feet are locked in stocks.
A horrific situation.
And the pastor really highlights the sensory deprivation of the space. He points out it was midnight, and obviously there was no electricity. It was utterly dark and completely terrifying.
I mean, it is the ultimate scenario of absolute confinement. They are physically wounded, legally trapped, and deprived of even basic sensory comfort. Literally everything in their environment is designed to break their will.
But instead of crying or shedding what the pastor refers to as tears of the weak mind, they do the most counterintuitive thing possible. At midnight, they start praying and singing praises to God so loudly that the other prisoners hear them.
Just belting it out.
Yeah. And I have to pause here because the cognitive dissonance is so loud. Why on earth would you sing when you are bleeding in a dungeon? The pastor even jokes that they didn't bring a choir with them. They just used their own rough voices.
Right.
How does this leap from intense physical suffering to triumphant praise actually function in the theology of this text?
It functions because, well, in this specific framework, praise is not a reaction to a favorable situation.
Okay.
It's an active tool deployed to dismantle an unfavorable one. Yeah, the sermon is meticulous in defining what true prayer actually is during a crisis. True prayer is not born of fear. It's not this fretful, trembling voice whispering in the dark, begging God to explain why this tragedy is happening to them.
So no bargaining.
No bargaining at all. The pastor explicitly says it must be a simple, bold expression of faith. By praising loudly right in the middle of the line, they are actively asserting that the external reality, the chains, the prison walls, the blood, is subordinate to the internal truth they're carrying.
They're overpowering the physical with the spiritual.
Exactly. The praise is viewed as an offensive weapon that, to use the pastor's exact phrase, pierces heaven.
Pierces heaven. And piercing heaven produces an instantaneous physical result in the biblical story. because the text notes that suddenly there was a great earthquake.
Right.
But it didn't just rattle the iron bars a little bit.
No, it was massive.
The pastor emphasizes that the actual foundations of the prison were shaken, every single door flew open, and everyone's bands were loosed. Even the actual criminals who were in that prison for their own legitimate crimes had their chains fall off, simply by being in the proximity of Paul and Silas's praise.
And you know, that detail about the foundations is vital for you to understand how the pastor applies this text to the massive crowd in Gaboko.
How so?
Well, he maps this historical event directly onto their present lives. He tells the congregation that the earthquake signifies that whatever has been buried in the foundation of their lives to hinder their progress will be shaken and rooted up by their praise.
Meaning what exactly?
He specifically references generational curses, things buried by ancestors long before the listener was even born.
Oh, wow.
The implication is that you don't even need to dig into your family history or psychoanalyze what a grandparent did wrong. The act of extreme praise acts as a seismic event that clears out those foundational blockages automatically.
That is so powerful. And the practical instruction he gives the audience on how to execute this is so specific. He tells them that once they pray and say their final amen, they have to immediately stop asking for the miracle.
Right, the asking phase is over.
Yeah, they have to pivot instantly into praising God for the instantaneous miracle as if it has already been completed.
Right.
I mean, you don't wait for the physical door to open so you can sing in gratitude.
No.
You sing to force the door open.
It is an aggressive, preemptive form of faith. You are praising the outcome before the physical evidence of the outcome even exists.
Yeah.
And that earthquake, that sudden manifestation of divine power breaking physical locks, forces us to look at the underlying mechanics of this power.
Because it wasn't just random geology.
Right, it wasn't a random geological event, it was a targeted strike.
But wait, if human praise is what triggers this earthquake, who is actually generating that power? Is God just reacting to the song from up in heaven, or does the believer actually possess the power to trigger it themselves?
The sermon addresses that directly by looking at the concept of delegated authority. It isn't just God acting unilaterally down from heaven, it's the believer acting with God's power here on earth.
Okay, how does that work?
The text points to Luke 9 and 10, where Christ calls his disciples together and literally gives them power and authority over all devils and to cure diseases.
So it's like a corporate proxy.
Exactly.
If you are a mid-level employee, but you show up to a hostile negotiation with a legally binding document signed by the CEO, you suddenly possess the full authority of the CEO in that room. You aren't using your own bank account. You aren't relying on your own physical strength to enforce the deal.
You're just the messenger.
Yeah, you are operating as a deputized messenger. It's like carrying a badge that forces the enemy to comply, not because of how tough you are, but because of the name stamped on the badge.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that corporate proxy analogy maps perfectly onto the theology. The scope of this delegated authority is presented as absolutely comprehensive.
It covers everything.
Everything. The pastor emphasizes that this applies to every conceivable demonic entity. He even specifically calls out demons encountered in dreams.
Really? Dream?
Yeah, think about how often a nightmare can ruin your entire morning, right? You wake up in a cold sweat, your heart is racing.
Oh, sure, it lingers all day.
Well, the pastor actually mocks these entities, calling them timid and shy, because they only have the courage to hide in the dark of a dream, lacking the backbone to confront a believer in the waking hours.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and he extends this authority to cover family histories, systemic life failures, and every single ailment of the physical body.
And the live transcript of the event puts this theology into immediate, breathtaking practice. I mean, the pastor doesn't just talk about authority theoretically. He leads a mass prayer commanding healings for incredibly specific conditions.
Very, very specific.
The sheer scale and detail of it is hard to wrap your head around. Like, he describes migraines as feeling like pounding yam on the head.
Which is a remarkably vivid, culturally resonant metaphor for that audience.
Totally. And he commands heart palpitations that feel like running a 100-meter race to cease. He calls out for short legs to literally grow out, for stiff fingers to loosen, for ulcers and cancers to disappear, and even for brain cells to properly reconnect. It is a full-spectrum deployment of spiritual authority over the human body.
It really highlights how tangible this belief system is. When the pastor says we operate as faithful messengers, we do not speak our own words, but declare what God has promised to do, He is activating that corporate proxy you mentioned.
We're handing out the badges.
Yes, he is telling tens of thousands of people that they possess the badge. But there's a crucial caveat in the text that we have to look at because it totally reorients the entire value system of this power.
Wait, let me make sure I'm mapping this out correctly. You just commanded a demon to leave your dreams, you just healed a disease, and the instruction is that there is something more important than that.
Yes, actually. The pastor points back to Luke 10. So the disciples return from their mission full of joy, amazed that even the spirits are subject to them through Jesus' name.
They're hyped up on the power.
Exactly. They're thrilled by the power of their new badge. But Jesus tells them explicitly not to make this power over spirits their primary source of joy.
Really?
Yeah. He says, notwithstanding in this, rejoice not that the spirits are subject unto you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven.
That is a staggering contrast. I mean, to have access to the power to heal cancer or break ancient ancestral curses, and to be told that this power should be secondary to something else.
It establishes a very strict hierarchy of spiritual values. Exercising earthly and spiritual authority is presented as immensely powerful and obviously necessary for navigating human suffering. But it is still strictly secondary to the eternal relationship with the divine.
The big picture.
Right. Earthly conspiracies, dark covenants, people plotting against you. The pastor argues that none of that matters compared to the quiet, unshakable fact that your name is securely recorded in the highest heaven by the hand of God himself. It's a clear warning against letting the thrill of the power eclipse the relationship with the actual source of the power.
Wait, if having your name registered in heaven is the ultimate prize, right? The ultimate joy that sits far above all this yoke-breaking supernatural power, how does a person actually secure that registration? Does it require some kind of massive sacrifice to access something that valuable?
Well, this is where the sermon shifts into its final and perhaps most structurally fascinating phase. It focuses entirely on the extreme accessibility of salvation.
Accessibility.
Yes. The pastor turns to Romans 10.9 to 10 to explain the actual mechanical requirements of how a person gets their name written in heaven.
Oh, right. He puts the ball entirely in the listener's court. He says the decision to eliminate every yoke and secure this registration is completely in your hands. You don't have to wait for lightning to strike you or for some prophet to select you out of a crowd.
He draws a very sharp, deliberate contrast to highlight just how accessible it is. He says God didn't ask people to scale high mountains to find enlightenment. He didn't demand that they swim across vast, dangerous rivers to prove their devotion.
No heroic quests.
None. And he didn't ask them to pay millions of naira or millions of dollars to purchase a ticket, because if God had set those requirements, well, only the athletically gifted or the financially elite could ever be saved.
Instead, God used two pieces of equipment that literally every single person already possesses. A heart and a mouth.
That's it.
That's the entirety of the requirement. Romans 10 says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved.
The pastor really hammers home the profound simplicity of this. You use your heart to believe and your mouth to confess. He even likens calling upon the name of the Lord to something as mundane and everyday as calling your junior sister across the room.
Just shouting down the hall?
Yeah, you just use your voice and call out. It requires zero special skills, zero financial capital, and zero physical mobility.
So, what does this all mean? It means the theology completely democratizes salvation. It takes these massive cosmic concepts, heavenly registration, spiritual warfare, demonic yokes, ancestral curses, and it boils them all down to just using your mouth and your heart in a simple declaration.
Anyone can do it.
Yeah, it leaves, as the pastor explicitly states, no excuse for anyone to remain bound.
And we have to look at the sociological impact of this, because that extreme theological simplicity is instantly paired with a highly structured logistical follow-through.
Oh, the logistics are wild.
Right. The live transcript reveals that this isn't just an abstract philosophical offer designed to just make people feel good in the moment. It triggers a massive organizational machine.
The logistics of the altar call at the end of the transcript are so intense. He asks people to stand up, and suddenly there is an army of counselors moving through this crowd of tens of thousands of people.
Like clockwork.
Yeah, they are handing out physical cards, they are collecting names, neighborhood addresses, and WhatsApp numbers. They are handing out welcome packages that even include a personal letter from the convener of the event.
It's extremely thorough.
And it's not just for the people standing in the physical field in Kiboko. The pastor starts reading out specific web links, ghkhq.org Connect for the online viewers to click, and SMS numbers for the radio and television listeners to text. They are even organizing a follow-up banquet for the new converts on Sunday.
It perfectly illustrates the duality of this framework.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, you have this soaring, ethereal rhetoric about earthquakes shaking the foundations of spiritual prisons and divine authority over cosmic forces.
High-level theology.
Right. And then on the other hand, you have meticulous ground-level logistics, ensuring that every single person who made a spiritual decision is immediately integrated into a tangible earthly community. It grounds all that spiritual euphoria in mundane administrative tasks.
Like filling out a form in capital letters.
Exactly, or joining a WhatsApp group. The cosmic authority is sustained by immense practical organization.
It bridges the gap between the invisible world of belief and the very visible reality of human connection. I mean, it's a masterclass in mobilizing a crowd, moving them from the internal realm of faith right down to taking a seat at a banquet on Sunday.
If we synthesize this whole journey we've been on through the text, it is quite remarkable how comprehensive the architecture actually is. The sermon builds a complete end-to-end system for navigating human suffering.
From start to finish.
Yeah, it starts intimately with the mind, teaching the believer to choose a personal divine truth rather than succumbing to the natural fear generated by the tragedies of others.
Overriding the spiritual doom scrolling.
Then it moves to radical action. When the darkness hits, when you are in the midnight hour of that inner prison, you don't fret, you don't panic. You deploy praise as an active heaven-piercing weapon to trigger a breakthrough.
And that breakthrough validates the delegated authority you carry. You realize you aren't fighting in your own limited strength, but acting as a deputized corporate proxy with the authority to command physical healing and spiritual freedom.
But importantly, it grounds all that spectacular power by reminding the believer of the hierarchy of joy.
The name's in heaven.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest thrill isn't in commanding miracles, but in the quiet assurance that their name is secure in heaven. A security that is acquired through the incredibly simple, universally accessible mechanics of just using a heart to believe and a mouth to confess.
It offers a deeply compelling look at how faith operates not just as a comforting thought for a rainy day, but as an active, empowering, and highly structured force for millions of people around the world. It gives a person who feels entirely powerless, who feels like they are locked in stocks in the dark, a framework to suddenly become, as the pastor said, an extraordinary person.
This raises an important question, one that heavily challenges our modern sensibilities. In our secular world, we generally define freedom as absolute autonomy. We think we are free when no one is telling us what to do, when we are the masters of our own destiny, entirely unbound by any external rules or authorities.
The ultimate independence. No bosses, no chains.
But this sermon suggests the exact opposite. It argues that true freedom, the kind that actually breaks the invisible yokes in your life and shakes the foundations of your prisons, isn't found in a life devoid of chains or authorities. It's actually found in absolute, total surrender to a higher divine authority. It claims that you only become truly free when you submit your destiny entirely to God.
So if our greatest yoke-breaking freedom comes strictly from absolute submission to a higher power, how might that reframe the way you think about what it truly means to be free in your own life? Because if you're walking around with an invisible burden, trying to muscle your way through the darkness alone, maybe the answer isn't trying to build the strength to carry it yourself. Maybe the answer is finding the right authority to hand it over to.